My name is Jessica Harrison, and I'm 31 years old. Sunday dinner at the Harrison family table had always been a tradition, but lately it felt more like a tribunal. Every week, I'd sit in the same chair I'd occupied since childhood, watching my family dissect every choice I'd made with the precision of surgeons and the compassion of vultures. I had learned to brace myself for the onslaught, but today, something felt different. As my sister Catherine began cutting her roast beef with deliberate precision, I knew the subject was about to turn to me. The smell of the roast filled the air, but it couldn't mask the tension in the room. "I heard you turned down another job offer this week." The words hit like a shot across the table. I should have known this would come up. In a family where everyone made it their business to know everyone else's business, privacy was a luxury I'd never been allowed. "It wasn't the right fit," I said simply, taking a sip of water and hoping the conversation would move on to something else. "The right fit?" My brother Michael laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. "Jessica, you've turned down 6 job offers in the past 4 months. At what point do you stop being picky and start being realistic?" "Maybe when the offers are worth taking," I replied, keeping my voice level despite the irritation building in my chest. My father set down his fork with a loud clank that made everyone at the table look up. "Worth taking," he muttered, almost to himself, before continuing. "Jessica, you're 31 years old. You live in a studio apartment that's barely bigger than our walk-in closet. You drive a car that's older than some of our neighbors' children. What exactly are you holding out for?" "Something that aligns with my values," I said quietly, the words barely leaving my mouth, before the table erupted in laughter. It wasn't warm family laughter, but the cruel kind that cuts deep and leaves scars. "Your values?" Catherine wiped tears from her eyes, half laughing, half crying. "What values? The value of being unemployed? The value of disappointing everyone who cares about you?" "I'm not unemployed," I protested, feeling my voice crack. "I freelance. I write content for—" "You write blog posts about cat food," Michael interrupted, his voice dripping with disdain. "That's not a career, Jessica. That's what college students do for beer money." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This wasn't the first time my work had been belittled by them, but today it felt sharper. They were all so sure of their right to judge me, to tell me who I should be. And maybe, just maybe, I was tired of fighting for a place in their world. "That's what I do," I said, my voice faltering despite my best efforts. "I write about sustainable living, ethical consumerism, social justice." The words hung in the air, but Catherine wasn't finished. "Topics that don't pay the bills," she interrupted. "Topics that don't build careers or create stability." "Stability isn't everything," I said, my voice stronger this time. The silence that followed was deafening. The clinking of forks against plates seemed to grow louder as the seconds stretched between us. Mom's face had gone very pale, and Dad's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping. But it was Catherine who spoke first. "Stability isn't everything?" she repeated, as if she couldn't quite believe what she'd heard. "Jessica, your mother and I have worked our entire lives to build stability for this family. We've sacrificed, we've saved, we've planned, and you sit there and tell us that none of it matters?" "That's not what I said," I whispered, the words coming out weaker than I wanted them to. "It's exactly what you said," Catherine snapped. "You just told us that everything we've worked for, everything we've built, everything we value is meaningless to you because you value the wrong things." My chest tightened, the weight of their words pressing down on me. The wrong things? I wanted to scream at them, but the words wouldn't come. I wasn't the one who had failed. I wasn't the one who had chosen a life of appearances over substance. They had chosen it for me. "You value appearances more than authenticity," I shot back, my voice rising. "You care more about what other people think than about what actually matters." "What actually matters?" Mom's voice was ice cold now. "Jessica, what actually matters to you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like nothing matters to you. Not your family, not your future, not your responsibilities." I wanted to argue, to tell them how wrong they were, but the words died on my lips. The truth was, they had been right about one thing. I hadn't been living the way they wanted me to. I hadn't been living for them. "We've given you every opportunity," Mom continued, her voice steady but betraying a slight tremor as she reached for her wine glass. "Every connection, every recommendation, every chance to prove that you could be the daughter we raised you to be." I wanted to tell her that I didn't need her opportunities, that I didn't need to prove myself to them. But instead, I sat there in silence, feeling the weight of 31 years of disappointment and failed expectations. The conversation spiraled from there, my father's bitter laugh echoing in my ears. I could see the disgust in their eyes. I could hear their condemnation, loud and clear. And then, out of nowhere, the notification came. I checked my phone out of habit, more out of reflex than expectation. And there it was, an email, confirming what I had almost forgotten about. My article, The Hidden Environmental Cost of Fast Fashion, had been selected as a finalist for the National Environmental Journalism Award. I stared at the screen, reading the message 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. The National Environmental Journalism Award, one of the most prestigious honors in my field. And the prize, $50,000. I had written that article months ago, forgotten about it, buried it under the weight of everything else. But now it was here, validation, recognition, a chance to prove that my work mattered. For the first time in this entire dinner, I felt something cold and powerful, creeping into my veins. I wasn't the failure they all thought I was. Not anymore. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Instead, I quietly slipped my phone back into my purse and let the rest of the dinner unfold around me. Let them finish their meal. Let them feel righteous about cutting me out of their lives. Tomorrow they'd understand exactly what they'd thrown away. I sat there, waiting for the moment to come when everything would change. The next day, the world shifted. I woke up early, my stomach heavy with the weight of the night before. The conversation from dinner still echoed in my mind, sharp and raw, but now there was something new. The award. I kept going over it in my head, trying to push away the nagging voice that kept telling me I was about to disappoint them again. My family, the ones who had torn me apart last night, had no idea what I was on the verge of. I didn't know what to expect at the ceremony. When I'd submitted my article, I had done it as a formality, an attempt to feel like what I was doing mattered. But now, as I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the simple black dress I had bought for job interviews, I realized how much this award truly meant. It wasn't just about the recognition. It was about proving to myself that I had value, that my work mattered in a world that had rejected me. The ceremony was being held at a grand hotel downtown. As I entered the ballroom, I couldn't help but feel out of place. The room was filled with professionals, journalists, editors, and media moguls. I spotted familiar faces, people whose names I'd seen on magazine covers, whose work I had admired for years. And somehow, impossibly, I was here with them. The evening passed in a blur of handshakes, polite conversation, and fleeting moments of self-doubt. I kept reminding myself that I belonged here, that this award was my achievement, not just a fluke. But when they finally called my name, I froze. The award for Outstanding Environmental Investigation goes to Jessica Harrison for her article, The Hidden Environmental Cost of Fast Fashion. The applause was deafening, and I felt my legs turn to jelly as I made my way to the stage. The lights were blinding, and for a moment I couldn't see anything beyond the spotlight. The crystal trophy they handed me felt heavier than I expected, and I was suddenly acutely aware of every person in the room watching me. "Would you like to say a few words?" the presenter asked, holding the microphone toward me. I looked out at the sea of faces, some smiling, some watching with rapt attention, others with curiosity. I cleared my throat and spoke, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Thank you," I said, the words simple but powerful. "This award represents 3 months of research, dozens of interviews, and countless hours of writing. But more than that, it represents the power of journalism to expose truths that powerful people would rather keep hidden." The applause grew louder. I paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in before continuing. When I started this investigation, people told me that fashion journalism wasn't serious, that environmental reporting didn't matter, that I was wasting my time on topics that didn't pay the bills. But sometimes the work that matters most is the work that other people don't understand. The room was silent now, hanging on my every word. For the first time in years, I felt like I was being heard, not by my family, but by people who understood the value of my work. Later that night, the media attention exploded. Editors from major publications, documentary filmmakers, even a literary agent approached me with business cards and congratulations. It was everything I had hoped for: validation, recognition, the promise of future opportunities. But in the midst of it all, my phone kept buzzing with messages from my family. Catherine's message came first. "Saw the news about your award. Congratulations." Then Michael's. "Mom told me about the journalism thing. That's actually pretty cool. And finally, Mom's message at 9:45 p.m. Jessica, we need to talk. Can you call me? Then Dad's. Saw your name in the newspaper. We should discuss this. I stared at my phone, feeling a surge of anger and disbelief. It was clear to me now that they only cared because this award could reflect well on them. They didn't care about my work. They cared about the social benefits of being associated with me. I didn't respond to any of their messages. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the couch, staring at the award, feeling a strange mix of triumph and loneliness. The next morning, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find my entire family standing in the hallway, looking uncomfortable and awkward. They were all there: Mom, Dad, Catherine, Michael. Jessica, Mom began, her voice quieter than usual. We think there may have been a misunderstanding yesterday. A misunderstanding, I repeated, my voice sharp. I didn't need them to apologize. I didn't need them to make excuses for the way they had treated me. We had no idea you were working on such important projects, Catherine said quickly, trying to smooth things over. If you'd known what? I asked, cutting her off. Treated me differently, respected my choices, not declared me dead to the family? Dad cleared his throat. We may have been hasty in our judgment, he said, his voice strained. Hasty? I asked incredulously. That's one way to put it. Michael stepped forward, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. The thing is, he said, struggling for words, this award you won. It's kind of a big deal, isn't it? It's the most prestigious award in environmental journalism, I said matter-of-factly, and the prize money, 50,000. The silence that followed was thick, as if they were processing everything all at once. I could see their minds working, calculating how they could benefit from my success. Jessica, Dad finally said, his voice softer now, we owe you an apology. Do you? I asked, my voice cold. Because yesterday you were very clear that my work didn't matter, that my values were wrong, that I was an embarrassment to the family. We didn't understand, Catherine began, her voice almost pleading. You didn't try to understand, I interrupted. For years, you've dismissed my work without ever asking what I actually do, what my goals are, what I'm trying to accomplish. Michael shifted uncomfortably. You write about cat food, he muttered. I shot him a look. I wrote one article about sustainable pet food manufacturing, I corrected him. One article out of hundreds, but that's the only one you ever bothered to remember because it fit the narrative you've created about my life. Mom stepped forward then, her voice tentative but trying to sound warm. We want to make this right, she said. We want to support you. How? I asked, my voice cutting through the tension. How do you make right years of treating me like a failure? How do you make right telling me I'm dead to you? They all stood there, speechless, their eyes downcast. But the truth was, nothing had changed. They didn't care about my work. They cared about how my success reflected on them. The next few days passed in a haze. Despite all the congratulatory messages and offers that flooded in after my win, the weight of my family's behavior still lingered, heavy in my chest. They didn't understand me, and I was beginning to realize they never would. Their superficial apology only reinforced what I had known all along. They wanted to rewrite their judgment of me, but only because it suited their image. The moment the award had the potential to reflect positively on their status, they wanted to embrace me. But their true support wasn't there, never had been, and likely never would be. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I couldn't keep living in their shadow. I couldn't keep trying to prove myself to people who would only love me when it benefited them. I needed to escape, to break free from the constant pressure to conform to their expectations, to live the life they wanted for me instead of the one I had chosen for myself. And then, just like that, an opportunity presented itself. I received an email from a major environmental magazine, one I had admired for years. They were offering me a full-time position as a staff writer, with a salary that would allow me to live comfortably, with benefits and resources to further my work on issues that actually mattered. The catch? The position was based in Portland, Oregon, a place I had always dreamed of living, but had never had the courage to move to. It was 3,000 miles away from the family dinners, the constant judgment, and the suffocating expectations. I didn't even hesitate. I sent my acceptance email that same day, feeling a sense of liberation as I did. I knew that my family wouldn't approve of my decision. They would likely see it as another reckless choice, another opportunity I had thrown away in their eyes. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care what they thought. I was doing this for me. I packed up my things and made the arrangements. When everything was in motion, I called my parents. "I got the job," I said, my voice calm, measured. "I'm moving to Portland." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the shock, the confusion, and a twinge of hurt in my mother's voice when she spoke. "You're moving across the country?" she asked, her tone flat, "without even talking to us about it first?" "I'm 31 years old, Mom," I said. "I don't need your permission to move." "But what about family dinner?" Catherine asked, her voice betraying her concern, though it wasn't really for me. It was more about how my absence would reflect on her. "We can stay connected," I replied, my words final, "but it will be on my terms now. I'm not going to keep defending my choices to you every week just to be part of the family." They tried to make excuses. They asked me to reconsider, to at least think about the impact my decision would have on them. But the truth was, I had been thinking about it for years. They had never truly understood me, and I had reached a point where I no longer cared to be understood by them in the way they wanted. I wanted to be seen for who I was, not for what I could do for their reputation. When I told them I had already signed the lease on an apartment in Portland, it was like a final blow. My mother's voice cracked as she tried to maintain her composure, but I knew I had made the right choice. I was walking away from a life I no longer recognized, a life defined by their expectations, and stepping into one where I could finally live for myself. The next few months were a whirlwind. I settled into my new apartment, a modest but comfortable one-bedroom in Portland's Pearl District. The city was everything I had imagined, full of life, opportunity, and a sense of freedom I had never experienced before. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace with myself. I had taken control of my life. I threw myself into my work with the magazine, tackling bigger investigations and growing my portfolio. The satisfaction of writing pieces that mattered, pieces that challenged the status quo, was unlike anything I had ever felt back in my small studio apartment, where I had been drowning in rejection and self-doubt. But despite the newfound joy I was experiencing, the echoes of my family's disapproval never fully went away. I saw glimpses of their lives through social media, heard about their gatherings from mutual acquaintances, and felt the faint sting of their absence during major milestones. At times, I questioned if I had made the right choice, but deep down, I knew I was finally living the life I had always dreamed of. One evening, as I was wrapping up an article on corporate environmental responsibility, I got a call from Catherine. Her voice was tight, and for the first time, I noticed a hint of vulnerability in it. "Jessica," she said, after a brief pause, "I read one of your articles today, the one on sustainable investing." I sat up straight in my chair, surprised. Catherine had never shown any real interest in my work before, except to mock it or dismiss it as insignificant. "I had no idea companies were doing that," she continued. "It's actually really important work." I blinked, taken aback by the sincerity in her voice. It was a small moment, but it felt like a breakthrough. The walls that had once separated us seemed to be crumbling, bit by bit. "Yeah, it's not easy to write about," I said, feeling a strange warmth spreading through me. "But it's worth it." "I know," she replied, her tone softer now. Maybe we could talk about it sometime. I want to understand more." For the first time in years, Catherine wasn't looking at me with judgment or disappointment. She wasn't trying to fix me. She was reaching out, genuinely trying to connect. Later that night, I called my parents to let them know how things were going. The conversation was awkward at first, but gradually the tone shifted. They weren't ready to fully accept everything about my life, but there was a shift in their understanding. Slowly, over time, we began to rebuild piece by piece. 2 years later, when I won a Pulitzer Prize for a series of articles exposing corruption in the EPA, my family's reaction was different. They didn't rush to brag about my success or use it for their own gain. Instead, they called me, not to talk about the prize itself, but to tell me how proud they were of my work and the difference it had made. For the first time, I believed them. The years that followed were nothing like what I had imagined they would be when I first moved to Portland. The road to this point, living on my own terms, pursuing work that resonated with me, and finding peace in the silence of my own company, had been long and filled with uncertainty. But it had also been filled with unexpected moments of clarity and growth, both professionally and personally. I found that true success wasn't just about winning awards or gaining recognition. It was about finding your own voice, your own purpose, and letting go of the need for validation from others. It was about living authentically, even if that meant walking away from everything you once thought you had to hold on to. When my family reached out to me again, months after my Pulitzer, I was in a different place. I wasn't the same person they had cut out of their lives that night at the dinner table. And when they called to say they were proud of me, I believed it for the first time. But I didn't just believe it because of my career achievements. I believed it because they were finally seeing me for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. It happened gradually, like the slow but steady unfurling of a new chapter. Catherine called to discuss the work I was doing on climate change policy and corporate accountability. She asked me to write a guest column for her law firm's newsletter on the ethical implications of greenwashing. It wasn't much, but it was a huge shift from where we'd been. She was asking to understand my work, truly asking, and that meant more to me than I could express. Michael sent me a message about a sustainable investment article I'd written for the magazine. "My clients are starting to ask about this stuff," he wrote. "Could we talk sometime about what you've learned?" It wasn't an apology, but it was a step forward, a recognition that my work mattered beyond the narrow lens of family reputation. Mom and Dad, too, began to show interest in my career. Mom sent me an email one morning, a simple message, but it was filled with something I hadn't seen in years: genuine pride. She didn't just mention my achievements. She talked about the impact of my work, about how she had seen articles like mine change the conversation about sustainability. She had even started following some environmental thought leaders on social media, trying to understand the world I was a part of. I didn't have the heart to tell her I had always known she cared. She just didn't know how to express it until now. The change was slow, but it was real. And then came the phone call that changed everything. It was from Dad. "Jessica," he said, his voice shaky, "I've been reading your articles, really reading them, not just the headlines, and I think I finally get it. I get why you do what you do. I don't always understand it, but I respect it. I want you to know that. I'm proud of you." There it was, the words I had waited so long to hear, but I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't need them to say it before, because I had already come to terms with who I was and what I wanted. The truth was, I hadn't been waiting for their validation as much as I had been waiting for them to see me. Not the version of me they had tried to shape, but the real version. I had built my own life, one that was true to my values, and now I was ready to let them be a part of it. Not because I needed them to approve of my choices, but because I was strong enough to let them in without letting them dictate my worth. Months later, after the media attention had died down, and I was back to my routine of freelance writing, my family's support began to waver. They didn't entirely understand everything I did, and they still questioned my decision to leave the stability of a normal career behind. But there was something different now. They weren't dismissing me. They weren't criticizing me. They were accepting me, even if they didn't fully agree with every choice I made. I had to acknowledge that this, too, was progress. The phone call came one evening. It was from Mom, and this time, her voice wasn't filled with the usual doubts or expectations. It was calm, content, almost relieved. "Jessica," she said, her voice lighter than I had ever heard it, "we've been thinking about things, and we wanted to ask, if you're free, would you come for dinner next Sunday?" The invitation was simple, and in some ways, it felt like a subtle test. They were testing the waters, unsure of what this new relationship between us could be. But I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I had already spent years building something stronger than the fragile connections of my past. Something that was based on mutual respect and understanding, not obligation or expectations. "Of course," I replied, a smile creeping into my voice. "I'd love to." That Sunday, I walked into the familiar home where I had spent so many Sunday dinners before. The smell of roast chicken filled the air, and for a moment, it felt as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The old patterns were gone. The conversations were lighter, more open. They didn't revolve around my failures anymore. We talked about work, about life, about the things that truly mattered. There was no tension, no mockery, no judgment. It was a real family dinner, not one built on expectations or the pressure to conform, but one where we simply enjoyed each other's company. Later that evening, as I sat on the couch, flipping through a magazine, I glanced at the clock and realized how much time had passed since I'd left the life I once knew. It had been 3 years since I moved to Portland, 3 years since I made the decision to step away from everything I had been holding on to. And now, here I was, on the other side, living a life that was mine. The phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from my thoughts. I looked at the screen. It was Catherine. I read your latest article on corporate accountability. I think you were right. We need to talk more about this. I smiled as I typed back a quick response, feeling a warmth spread through me. For the first time, it wasn't about proving myself anymore. It was about sharing a piece of who I was with the people who had once rejected me and knowing that this time they were finally ready to listen.